Van Gundy did have, I thought, something interesting to say before the game that was then brought up on the pregame show of Inside the NBA, because he was talking about Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. And Doncic had a signature playoff moment last night, hits the step-back three over Rudy Gobert.
Oh, how funny was that?
I felt bad for the guy, man. I mean,
for Rudy?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, man. That's one of the
most just got taken out of the dance
pompous
floor.
Frenchman I've ever seen, man. And that dude is just, that was funny. That was like, I haven't laughed that hard since Seinfeld. That was like, he looked like when he got isolated with Luka, I was like, oh, I think one of his legs got dislocated from his hip. Like he looked like he looked like a baby mule. You ever see one of those babies that are trying to get their footing? Like, look at this.
Like a baby giraffe when they come right out.
He looked like you coming back from the bars at 3 a.m. in D.C. last weekend.
It was more like 4 p.m. or 4 a.m. I can't remember what time zone I was in. But, yeah, no, you're right. He looked like a stork, he was trying to find his footing. I mean, it did not look good. And it didn't look good, number one, because, Luka just put him on an island. But also, that's the defensive player of the year. That's the defensive player of the year.
He's been a liability in this series because he can't, that drop coverage. How many dunks is Gafford and P.J. Washington going to get on this guy?
Yeah, Derek Lively.
Because he's never been able to extend. That's the one thing Draymond's like, if you're going to be the defensive player of the year, you got to get out on the perimeter. And he can't. It's the reason why Utah shipped him, because when it came to the postseason, he's like, we can't play this guy because they're going to go small and I can't use this dude. And you're beginning to see it come to fruition here with Minnesota.
Well, there's that clip that's gone viral from last night. And what we're talking about is Dallas and Minnesota. Dallas takes a 2-0 series lead, 109-108 on the go-ahead three-pointer by Luka Doncic. But the video is after they switch, the camera zooms in on Jaden McDaniels' face, and he's just cringing. It almost like he knew what was about to happen. And that's why I felt bad for Gobert, because even his own teammates are like, oh, bleep. Luka Doncic has got our guy, our Frenchman, out on the perimeter.
He should not have been on the floor.
Well, that too, that was interesting because Finch actually took him off the floor for Kyle Anderson a couple possessions prior. So there was that strategic miscue. But then again, if he's your defensive player of the year, you imagine he would be able to stay on the floor. The other part of it, too, is if you're Gobert, and I'm sorry, I know that he was trying to play good defense and his quick feet and all the rest, force him to the basket. It's a 2-point game. The one thing you can't do is let him dot one in your eye and go ahead. Make him go to the basket. And that way you also don't get embarrassed, I think.
Well, I don't know. That's easier said than done. How do you make him go to the basket? The whole thing is that the minute he's on the floor, J-Kid, Luka, Kyrie, everybody in the stadium that knows anything about basketball knew that they were going to hunt out that switch. Where is Gobert? All right, who is it that he's guarding? That's this. Give it to Luka. Find the switch. Go get Gobert on you. Game over.
This is a 5 from the YouTube chat. One of our favorites, Uncle Looney. Gobert looked like he was playing Dance Dance Revolution. Yeah, that's.
He looked like he was doing the stanky leg. Randy stanky leg.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I just felt bad for the guy because he had no chance. He had no chance, and Luka was going to get a good look. But the other thing that came out of that game, in addition to a great back and forth, I thought between Dallas and Minnesota, and it looks like Dallas is. I don't think the series is over by any means.
I'm with you,
but I do think that obviously the Mavericks have quite an advantage. It's going to take a big effort from Minnesota. They almost got to grab 2. They got to get both games in Dallas. But the other thing was Stan Van Gundy was talking about, I'm not sure if it was game 2 exactly. It might have been game 1 where he mentioned Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving as being the best backcourt he'd ever seen. Now, I think he was speaking more so to the talent, and I'm curious about your interpretation, Dan, but also people's out there at 888-957-9570, because Reggie Miller was asked about it before the game yesterday, and Draymond, of course, went after him and immediately jumped him. It was like, well, duh, it's Steph and Klay.
Yeah.
That's by far the best backcourt ever. But you don't seem to think that it's as one-sided of a conversation.
Well, I think Van Gundy's right. I think Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving are the best backcourt, but just hear me out. Listen, I'm just talking about them as individual players.
About to go Mr. Burns on you and unleash the hounds.
But when you're talking about, because they haven't done it over a longer period of time, you have to qualify that statement. They haven't won titles. They've only been together for a year and a half, all right? So When you're talking about those two players, and this is not to detract from the two greatest shooters that the sport has ever seen when you're talking about the Splash Brothers. But Klay and Steph matched up against Kyrie and Luka. Luka puts it over the top simply because he's 6'7", and the guy is ridiculous, all right? We all know that that combination as individual players are better individually than that of Klay and Steph. Now, they haven't done it over an extended period of time. I get that. They haven't won titles, so it depends on how it is that you're presenting that argument and or that question. Those two players, standalone, yes, they're better than that of Steph and Klay. And that's not to take away or denigrate the talents of the Splash Brothers whatsoever.
I think I would push back on that, though. Now, I think it's close in terms of talent, but Steph Curry, and we're talking about Luka Doncic right now in his prime. I mean, he's at the peak of his powers, and he's starting to even become better potentially in these clutch late game situations, a place that we all assume that Kyrie Irving would be the one that took over. I think Kyrie's probably on the back end of his prime, but he's still playing at a very, very high level. I would argue that in their primes, Steph and Klay are just as talented as those two players. Klay, more so on the defensive side of things, but is the second greatest shooter of all time, in my opinion, only behind the guy that we're talking about at the forefront, which is Steph Curry. Yeah. I think the talent level is just as even. And you're right. They do have to prove it. The Mavericks do. And if they win a championship this year, maybe we can have that conversation about being, accomplished. I just feel like if you are looking at them as individuals, I think Steph and Klay have as much of a right to be in the skill and talent debate as Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving.
Luka just, to me, puts it sort of slightly over the top. But Luka doesn't play defense. I know he's doing it this year, so you can make the argument.
He's averaging a triple-double, basically.
You know what's so funny is that I am not buying Kyrie. I'm not buying this nonsense that I'm a good guy all of a sudden, and that,
He's been a lot more likable this year.
I'm a likable, and I suddenly got a smile on my face. Bro, I know what you did to Brooklyn, man. You set that franchise back 10 to 15 years. Not that they were going anywhere.
No, it wasn't just him.
And not to mention what it is that you did in Boston. You wanted out of Cleveland, and you were on Planet Kyrie for those 3 to 5 years. You were an absolute lunatic. And I'm willing to bet that Kyrie Irving will show his spots at some point. Like, something will go wrong, and he will go back to being Kyrie. I am not swallowing I'm suddenly this good guy. The only reason why he's being this way is because he was on his last option. It got to a point where Kyrie Irving, one of the greatest guards of all time, nobody wanted to touch the guy coming out of Brooklyn simply because of the insanity. All of that nonsense. What's nice about him now is that when you mention Kyrie Irving, you can actually talk about basketball, which hasn't been the case with this guy over the last 5 years. So, but I'm not swallowing this pill that, first of all, he's playing defense. No. And secondly, that he's suddenly this upstanding citizen.
I got more on that in a moment. But 888-957-9570 is the number. This is Saturdays with Evan Giddings and Dan Devone on 95.7 The Game. Stan Van Gundy said the Luka and Kyrie are better backcourt than Steph and Klay. Dan's with him. Sick him.
You can make the argument. I get it. But I think that those two players, Luka Doncic in his prime, Kyrie Irving in his prime, and Steph, yes, and Klay in their prime, I give the nod slightly to Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving simply because of Luka. Luka he's one of one.
Who else is a prisoner of the moment? 888-957-9570. Let's get out to Austin in San Jose. I think he wants to talk to you, Dan. Austin, what's going on, my man? How are you?
My guy, Dan. I can't believe he lost his mind on this Saturday morning. Good morning, guys. Great conversation. But no, man, look at the gravity of Steph, the Splash Brothers, man, over time. These guys, okay, Johnny come. I know, yeah, Luka's great, man, but he's finally found somebody he can play with. I mean, call me in about 4 years when these guys have accomplished with the Splash Brothers. And you got to remember, too, you said they couldn't play him. But who's guarding Steph? Which one of those guys is guarding Steph? I'm sorry. I know that Kyrie is great, but no one shoots like Steph Curry in the history of basketball. So I'm taking the Splash Brothers, man. And again, we got to see Luka. We got to see this conversation do it over more time before we start crowning. And we all know that Van Gundy has got a thing for the Splash Brothers because he got passed over for the job. Wasn't he supposed to get the job before Kerr?
Yes,
no, I didn't think about that.
So he's got some stuff with him. So don't judge the Dan. Be careful. Don't judge Kyrie, man. Listen, the dude had some issues, but I love Warrior fans a couple years ago saying, there's no way we'd want Kyrie in our locker room. How does that look now? I tell you one thing, I'd love to have Kyrie in the Warriors locker room looking at what we got. And then last thing, guys, look at the playoffs, Dan. And I know you know where I'm going, but look at the Dallas. Look what Dallas did at the trade deadline.
Right on, Austin.
And we did. And what did we do? We said, guys were saying, "Oh, we got it, man. We don't need to make any moves." Are you kidding me? Look at the lineup that we're playing. Look at OKC. Look at Dallas next year. What are the Warriors? Look at the Warriors locker room right now. The backups, guys. I'm sorry, Podziemski, TJD. These guys are okay, but the talent level. There's a big distance between our backup talent level and what those other teams have. And I want to hear what you guys think. But the Warriors, man, they better go out and get some guys that can play, man. These guys they have, Moody and these guys, come on, man. These guys aren't even in the same conversation in my mind. That's all I got, guys.
Thanks, Austin.
P.J. Washington and Gafford were right there for the taking. And you want to know why Dallas was able to put it into another gear and make this current run? Yes, Kyrie and Luka, but it was what they did at the trade deadline and going and getting P.J. Washington and Gafford. That's what put them over the top. And the Golden State Warriors, for whatever reason, said we're going to stand pat.
Well, it's not just this deadline. It's the last two deadlines.
And not to mention...
Remember, they traded for Kyrie Irving.
But not to mention...
And everyone thought that they were crazy.
To Austin's point, these are two bigs. What's the one thing the Warriors needed? It was all there. Like, I don't give them a pass. I know a lot of this is in retrospect, but, I mean, the Warriors needed... They were vertically challenged. And there are two guys that went to Dallas. And to me, is the difference between Dallas not even making the playoffs and a team that is on the verge of potentially winning an NBA championship.
Well, and you could also look at the Indiana Pacers. They got aggressive at the trade deadline, too. And they gave up
Siakam, man.
3 first-round picks and a decent player in Bruce Brown. But, you know, I think that's worked out for them as well. I think they caught more breaks. Like, Dallas truly transformed themselves. I mean, they became a different team after the trade deadline, defensively speaking. And the amount of bodies that they can throw, I think they also would have been able to give Denver some trouble as well. Would they be up 2-0 on Denver? I'm not so sure. But that strategy or the roster construction of 3 bigs essentially, because I would also throw Washington in there, but Gafford and Lively are great, basically substituting in for one another. The Warriors don't have multiple bigs right now. Draymond is a big, but I would say at the 5 spot, it's one of the reasons why, as much as you and fans love Trace Jackson Davis, I think if this team is going to be good, they have to have another center. And I think they need to upgrade at that position because I don't think it's fair for a second-year player to all of a sudden be thrust into an 82-game schedule and just be assumed to someone who's going to bang with the Jokic's and the Gaffords and the Liveleys and all these bigs around the West that are going to pose some problems. So I do agree with Austin. I think they need to get better, and I think they need to get better than Trace Jackson Davis.
Well, I'm good with Trace Jackson Davis. It's just you need other players alongside him. Like, you need a front line that's just not Kevon Looney and Draymond Green. That's silly. Like, you need to go get some guys that are 6'10", 6'11", that can play along with Trace Jackson Davis or be in that rotation. You just need serviceable bodies that can give up the 5 fouls or they can counter the bigs, that can rim protect or get into a dunker spot on the other end. Like, that's the way the game's being played. I mean, I thought I could avoid this rant today, but the way the Golden State Warriors are still stuck in 2018 and small ball and 5 out, it ain't working, bro. Not when you're in your mid-30s. Stop it, Steve Kerr. Move on, brother. You got to go get big. Look at the landscape of the NBA. Everybody has got a significant big, and not only that, everybody's in their mid to late 20s.
Well, I think there is a distinction. You either need to lean all the way into 5-out basketball, or you need to have size. Because I think Minnesota and Dallas are prime examples of teams that have a lot of height and athleticism at the big spot. But a team like Boston plays without, a true traditional center. I mean, they play 5-out basketball. Oklahoma City, I know they lost to Dallas, but they pretty much play 5-out basketball. Chet Holmgren is not a traditional, 7-foot guy in the middle. So I think they need to choose. And I think that they're closer to, I guess, getting bigger. Like, I think it'd be easier for them to address the size issue this offseason than to try and bring in or keep Klay and then go out and find a bunch of different shooters. They were linked to Malik Beasley this week. I think the team that I'm looking at if we're talking about plucking guys or trying to acquire talent, it's the Cleveland Cavaliers. Right now, they are, not a dumpster fire, but they're trying to figure out who they want to be, what pieces they want to keep. And I think there's a couple of guys on that team, but Jared Allen is the one that I would want. I also think Jared Allen's probably disgruntled in Cleveland after someone came out and said anonymously that he should have played through his pain, that he should have played through his injury, or he thought he could. Jared Allen could have played through his injury. If I'm hearing that from Jared Allen, and you're not gonna put your name on that quote, I'm walking right to the front office and saying, "Get me the hell out of here," because my teammates apparently don't want me. They don't think that I'm serious about the game, even though I am. Even though I busted my ass for this team since I came over here from Brooklyn, not on my own accord. Go try and get Jared Allen, because I think he's a serviceable 7-footer that can address what we're talking about.
Yeah, and listen, is Evan Mobley upset out there? You can take him as well, but this is
him, and I also like Darius Garland. I know he's not a size player, but I think he's a young point guard that you can put on ball. Darius Garland, I think they would probably want to get rid of him and his contract. He's 24 years old, and he's coming off a down year.
You want to know where he's going? San Antonio.
You think?
Oh, yeah, because that's the one thing the Spurs need. That's the one thing.
I was going to say Los Angeles, but
that Wemby needs is a point guard. No point guard, and they've got all sorts of trade capital. And that would make so much sense for San Antonio. And Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell just doesn't work. So I think he's going to San Antonio. And the Warriors don't necessarily need him.
That would help them a lot.
The Warriors, it's an upgrade, but that's not the area of need. The area of need.
I think it would be a now and later move, just because he's so young. He's somebody who could take over. I don't know, as the centerpiece of a franchise, but I think he's been maligned since Donovan Mitchell got there. He's better than he's played.
But just to counter your point when you said, okay, yeah, Boston plays 5 out, but they've got Porzingis, who was a big addition to that team, and Horford and company. Listen, Porzingis is not a conventional center, but he can be 7'2" and be disruptive to counter the Jokic's of the world. And the same thing with Chet Holmgren. While he plays out on the perimeter, I get it, but he still can be a guy that can stand under the hoop and just simply raise his arms and be disruptive. And the Warriors don't have that. And not to mention that those teams, when you're talking about 5-out basketball for Boston and OKC that were in the postseason this year, they're all, again, in their 20s. Boston's in the sweet spot because in their mid to late 20s, and, of course, OKC might be a few years away, but all younger teams. 5 out when you're 35 years of age simply doesn't work, and then doing that without any bigs is a recipe for a team that ain't going to the postseason, which is the Golden State Warriors. So get young and get bigger. Easier said than done, I get it, but that's got to be sort of like the blueprint, the template going forward.
Well, I also think when they were in their 20s, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson were better than Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Also, this is something from the Xfinity Mobile text line 949. Quick correction, SVG didn't say that Luka and Kyrie were the best backcourt of all time. He said the best offensive backcourt of all time. I would also, I think Steph, if we're just zeroing in on what they can do offensively, I also think Steph and Klay have ammunition to be at the head of the table. I mean, Dan, if I'm just kind of going down the list of great backcourts of all time, Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars, right?
Yeah, they pale in comparison to the Splash Brothers.
I will say, I was watching some Zeke highlights last night. Kyrie does remind me of him a lot. I know I didn't get to watch him play in his prime, obviously, but Isaiah Thomas, Kyrie's got some Zeke in him offensively.
But Kyrie in his prime with Cleveland, when he hit that game winner against the Golden State Warriors,
I think he's still in his prime.
Well, he's 32. He's not 25. I'm just saying.
Curry was 34 and won a Finals MVP.
But when you think about Kyrie when he was younger, and then Luka Doncic just slightly is why I give the edge to that tandem. And listen, just to get back at Austin, I'm not saying that those two guys. Yeah, we're talking about just individually in their prime as players.
Yeah,
I just slightly give the nod to Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving because the best shooters of all time. There's not even an argument. All right, it's Klay Thompson and Steph Curry. But if you want to get big and you want to be able to post somebody or give me a rebound and triple doubles, Luka Doncic is just so much more in his prime. And then Kyrie Irving with his handle in his prime, not as good as Steph. And maybe, I think he's a little better than Klay, but those two in their prime, I'm just talking pound for pound. Now, look they're not going to do it in Dallas nearly as long, or I don't know how many titles are going to win Dallas, if any. So it's all about longevity, and they don't have that in their resume. So I'm not comparing this in terms of the careers between these two. But I'm just saying that pound for pound, if you were to measure who's the better player in their prime, I think Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, just slightly, I give the nod over the Splash Brothers. Although I can be swayed.
Yeah, if you want to respond, 888-957-9570 is the number. This is Saturdays with Evan Giddings and Dan Devone, taking you up until noon. This is from the 510, the Xfinity Mobile text line. Not saying that there's Steph and Klay, but can I get some Magic Johnson and Byron Scott love?
Oh, very good back in the day.
Magic and Michael Cooper, perhaps. Michael Jordan, whoever was playing the one. That's pretty funny. Kobe and whoever is playing the one. Actually, one of the backcourts that did come to my mind that was pretty good. They're not Steph and Klay, and that was also proven, but I think James Harden and Chris Paul, when they were playing in Houston, were a pretty dynamic duo. They were a pretty damn good tandem as well.
How about DeRozan and Lowry? Not bad. Not necessarily, certainly in that rarefied air, but
they were good. Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on kind of who you consider a guard. Like, I know sometimes, like this OKC team, when they had Russell Westbrook and Paul George, sometimes Paul would slide and play a little bit smaller. It's a pretty good backcourt. Even I think Paul George is considered a forward. I don't know. I mean, right now, Drew Holiday and Jaylen Brown, like that's a pretty good backcourt if you consider Jaylen Brown the two for that team. But we're talking about best backcourts right now because Dan Devone believes that there might be more talent in Dallas than in Golden State.